Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the AIM Growth Partners podcast, the show where I get to speak to founders building some of the most exciting and impressive companies across cybersecurity, emerging tech, and AI. Today, I'm joined by Nate Dunning, the co-founder and CEO of Osprey, a UK-based cybersecurity startup tackling one of the sector's biggest problems, malicious open source packages. Nate, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
Nate, for the listeners who don't already know who you are, who kind of aren't followers and familiar with the work you're doing, could you please provide a bit of a high-level intro to yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been a technologist my entire life. I was in computer classes in high school. I was, hacking and breaking video games when I was pretty young. Then when I got into college or university, I was in computer science. I realized that's probably not the right track for me. I like breaking things more than I like building them. And so I actually got into cybersecurity because there's one of those paper flyers with the little tabs at the bottom that you tear off. I tore that off and called the number. They paid $1 more than the engineering job I had. So I was like, yeah, sure, why not? I'm young, right? It turned out I absolutely loved it. And I worked there for a little over half a decade. And that was a security operations center for RSA and Dell. And then I hopped the pond over to the UK. Did a little bit of incident response and security operations work for a post-IPO unicorn darling funding circle. They're great company, and then most recently did some data security stuff at Starling Bank, and then now started Osprey to really dig into supply chain security.
Well, thanks for that introduction. And, there's inevitably a load of things we're going to unpack on this episode. But talk to me, I guess, first of all, so that we can kind of frame the call right. What is the core problem that you're solving at Osprey?
Yeah, so if you're an engineer, while you're building your application, nobody wants to reinvent every line of code that's ever been written. If you have to convert an image file, you use open source code. You bring in a package that does that for you. If you need basic arithmetic, 1 plus 1 doesn't equal to duck, right? You bring in open source code. So in enterprises, usually somewhere sit between 85 to 97% open source code. And it's that 3%, that 10% that's actually their special sauce that make Starling Bank one of the greatest financial institutions right now in online banking, or Netflix make sure that shows end up on your TV. But everything else is open source code. And what attackers have been starting to do a little bit more frequently than we would like is actually just pop some malware in the open source environments. And that way, either engineers go and accidentally download it, maybe it's typo squatted, or they take over a legitimate package and then you download what you used to know as a known, trusted, good package. And now you have malware that's directly onto your engineer's laptop and potentially pushed into your production and application stack.
And what's the real consequence then? So I can understand kind of at a high level from an engineering perspective that obviously they're going to want to borrow or kind of use as much as this open source software to speed up their work and not have to write everything from scratch. What's the real risk then? You talked about the bad actors are starting to inject malware into this open source code, which is a threat. Talk us through the actual business consequences.
Yeah, so if an engineer were to download this malware, this malicious package onto their laptop, a lot of the malware looks at the laptop itself first. So are there any secrets? Are there any tokens? Are there any crypto wallets? Are there any things that it can steal and then take away from that engineering endpoint? And what this means for the organization is that every single engineer's laptop and all of those files you've downloaded, the bloated downloads folder, the code from like 6 years ago because you still haven't refactored your laptop, all of these things are ripe, juicy targets for that little bit of malware just to come, download, and steal. After that, there's a secondary impact, which could be that this malware goes undetected, gets pushed into production, and is now sitting live in your actual application. For a company, this could mean that your customers are now impacted, your partners are impacted, the third parties that use it, if you serve your application to others, all of them could be impacted. And this gets into, try and stay away from the nitty-gritty of it, but in my incident response life, right, those are all separate avenues for incidents that you'd have to go down. Like, cool, okay, we have a customer-facing impact. Now we have to send out comms, and now your brand is damaged because they know that you were hacked or you had malware in it, and they were impacted. Your actual customers were impacted by this malicious package.
So far more than just being kind of an IT and a tech and a cybersecurity problem, there are real
Absolutely.
severe business impacts, reputational loss, financial loss, and probably a myriad of other things.
Yeah, absolutely. On the face of it, and then you have to fix it, right? And then you have to figure out where it was, which engineer it was, what part of the application it was. Maybe you don't detect it for 6 months, and now you have to re-engineer that part of your customer-facing application because it was built on a foundation that had a bit of malware in it.
And before we talk specifically about kind of what Osprey is doing, or I guess it kind of is a good sort of segue into it, the cybersecurity market is such a fiercely competitive market and industry as it is. So talk around the gap and the sweet spot you found for Osprey. What are you guys doing differently that the kind of incumbents haven't?
Yeah, so we identified this gap partially because my co-founder and I had felt this pain in industry. When we were working at
Mm.
organizations, we had been there, we had seen a malicious package or a third-party incident come through the engineering pipeline, and then it was just heck on earth to actually figure out where it is and stop it. Oftentimes, you have to rotate tons of credentials, which costs hours, and that breaks things, which costs hours. Or you have to rotate tons of laptops, which costs hours. So you build up this operational debt across your organization just because 172 lines of code was downloaded from the internet from a command line. So really, the way we're identifying is there are thousands, literally thousands of organizations out there that are really, really good at identifying and stopping vulnerabilities. We don't do that. That's your SCA tooling, your software composition analysis, all of that kind of fun stuff. They do that. But what malware doesn't have is a pretty little CVE label. They don't have a vulnerability tag on it. Those SCA tools really try and laser focus in on the CVE, and then they detect some of the other things, maybe secrets, maybe other things like that. But the malware, because it just looks like a normal package, will get passed right on through. So what we've done is we've taken it a step above, and instead of looking for a signature like the CVE, we're looking at the behavior of what the malware is actually doing. So if it's a calculator, why is it looking for crypto wallets, right? If it's an arithmetic package, why is it reaching out to the internet? These are signs of mismatching behavior, and possibility of malicious behavior.
And what's the benefit then of taking it this kind of level above and
Mm.
instead of kind of focusing down kind of in the weeds and in the reeds, you're focusing on this behavioral level. What's the kind of the benefits that brings?
Yeah, it means we don't chase our tail as much. The thing with signature-based detection is you're always trying to update the signatures. As soon as the malware is detected, now you have to update your signatures and update all of the signatures for all of your customers. For behavioral-based, if an attacker takes a bit of code and then rewrites it with, Claude or AI or something like that, and then republishes it, the behavior will still stay the same. It's stealing, it's disrupting, it's encrypting, it's destroying, whereas the actual signatures will change. So we don't have to change any of our detections as the malware morphs across different permutations, whereas signature detection would have to constantly be updating the name and versions of the malicious package.
Right, gotcha. So, and if I'm kind of reading that correctly, it sounds like there's more of a proactive nature as
Mm.
well to what you're doing rather than being purely on the reactive end. Is that right, first of all? And if
Yeah.
so, I'd love to kind of understand more.
Yeah, absolutely. It's more proactive for two reasons. One, because we're actually able to detect the behavior and we don't have to have the malware execute or see bad behavior before we label it as bad. We can detect the behavior right from the get-go. But also, we're moving as close to the engineer as possible. So we're no longer just doing it in the pipeline, which means the engineering laptop gets infected, but you saved production. That's great. That's a good place to start. Save production if at all possible. But you still have to deal with the incident that is the infected engineer's laptop. So we're able to sit on the engineer's laptop and in the engineer's tooling and in the engineering pipeline to make sure we get the package wherever and whenever it pops up. So we look at it as plug and play because the
Mm.
back end engine really does the same thing. It scans code, right? So it doesn't matter if you're getting that from your engineering laptop or your CI/CD pipeline or wherever. We have a handful of plugins that can sit in different parts of the engineering lifecycle, and all of them just report back to our back engine. It scans the code as necessary, and then gives you a result in real time.
Talk to me then about the journey from going from an employee at kind of some somewhat large organizations to early stage, startup that you're in
Hmm.
today.
Yeah, I think in many ways, uh, being your own boss and being an external vendor is a complete culture shock. But also, it's really not that different. So when
Mm.
you're in an internal security team, when I was running those teams, I would always treat the rest of the user base as customers, right? If the customer is happy, then you're doing a good job. If you're locking down the users at a bank or something like that to the point where they can't function and they can't respond to the requests that the bank's customers are actually producing, then you're failing. Like, security is there to enable the business, not disable it and lock it into a little box and throw it in the ocean, because that's security, right? So realistically, being able to identify business pains in an organization, processes that need to be improved. This open source security one is an excellent example, right? Because there's kind of two paths you can go down. You can either disable the engineer, tell them you're not allowed to use any open source ever, write it all from scratch, or request it first, and then they have to wait hours or sometimes days to get a response back. That's not a functioning business process. So what you're losing there is innovation. You're losing the cutting edge that makes fintechs or technology companies beat their competitors out, win over new customers and clients. And so whether you're doing that internally with better phishing protection or better endpoint protection, or you're doing it externally as a vendor, it's that core business value that you're really trying to get to. So we don't see ourselves as much as a malware protection company. That's the thing we do. We see ourselves more as an engineering enabling a security company, so that we can really get companies back to doing what they want to do. Engineers don't care about security. They care about building. That's why they're engineers, not security analysts, right? So let's keep them building.
I think that's a really interesting insight. I want to spend some time
Mm,
kind of like looking in and drilling further into that because
please.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you are a first time founder, aren't you?
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in any sort of patronizing way, but it's interesting when I speak to a lot of founders on this podcast, they'll say like, oh, my lesson from my first one is I was thinking so much about the product and not, about distribution or about the customers I serve. And a really useful kind of nugget of wisdom I got from what you were saying there is, you know, we don't need to be talking about the security and focusing on the security. We need to be talking about the kind of the enablement. Now,
Yeah.
is that something you always kind of had, that more business savvy or business level mindset, or is that something you discovered through your kind of entrepreneurial journey?
No, I think that's partially because like cutting my teeth in a SOC that was an MSSP, right? So we had three or
Mm.
400 customers. Everyone literally was a customer. So your security was a product that you were adding to someone else's business rather than an internal thing. So it might have come a little bit from there. But quite honestly, I think it's from surrounding yourself with people that are much smarter than you. So advisors are really, really important. Always having a mentor is really important. Being willing to take on feedback and have someone raise their hand and be like, you're kind of missing the point. Hey, you're focusing on like if the dashboard is green or blue. That is not what people buy, right? They buy the feeling that they get when the good thing happens, when they're more secure, when they move faster, whatever it is. And so that's really what we've focused on. And I think a lot of startups fail because the founders, like you said, either focus too much on technology or don't focus enough on each other as co-founders or something like that. So there's a mismatch between the founding team or the market and the product or something like that. We spent 6 months talking to each other, making sure we were a match, David, my co-founder, and I. And then also we spent another 3 months with some overlap there, going through some ideation, really listing out what are the business pains we've both felt in our careers. What are the things that we think we could fix? Oh, cool, that's an awesome project, but nobody would pay for it. So then it's just a project, right? Or what are some of the things that we think are really going to explode? And malware in open source has been increasing 188% year on year. Um, Supply chain as a whole has been more and more in focus. I think DORA is a good example of that. I think the Resiliency Act, and honestly, we were guessing this, but AI has caused this to explode as well. Vibe coding just bloats the heck out of applications, which is it's fine. Vibe coding is there for to like decentralize engineering to everybody, but that also means that not everybody that's using it is has the keen eye of an engineer. So something that might only need a couple hundred packages might have a couple thousand packages. And I'm not trying to exaggerate. We were working with a potential customer a couple weeks ago who used to have this really slick, clean application that they had worked on for a couple of years, and then they admitted to us, we vibe coded this for the last like 9 months. It's gotten so bloaty we don't know where anything is. It was over 2,000 packages. It was like 4 times bigger than what they thought it was, just because they had let AI kind of do its thing. So I think fighting fire with fire is always important, right? Managing APIs was really difficult until we built tools that could natively identify and manage APIs. Managing AI manually or with Jira tickets or something like that would be a nonsense, right? So we have to take things up a notch. And really what I think AI is doing is it's lessening some of the cognitive load that people are feeling in their day-to-day, right? Autocorrect in your email or phone, that lessened some of the administrative load, so you don't have to respell bureaucracy 4 times. It just helps you spell it. I still can't spell
Always
bureaucracy.
catches me out that one. That was a great
Yeah.
example.
Yeah. So AI is doing similar things. Like writing an information security policy is a nightmare, right? But knowing what to put in there is what a good security professional can do. So you can either spend like 2 weeks doing that from scratch and working on the legalese and fine tuning all of that, or you can have an AI help you write it and make sure that you include the key points. So yeah, fighting AI with AI or enabling AI with AI is probably one of the only ways that it's going to be possible to go forward. The other thing I think is constantly talking to your customers, constantly talking to your users, because we are in an age that it's not like an age of continuous innovation in one direction, it's innovation in every direction. People are using AI every way imaginable. So unless you know what people are actually doing, what your users, your engineers, your analysts are doing, and how they're using AI, you might just be building for something that doesn't exist because 6 months have passed.
Mm. So it's important to always have that kind of continuous feedback loop, speaking to, your customers, speaking to the market, and ensuring that you're actually building something that's hand in glove what they want, not what
Exactly.
you've kind of conceived from, a previous role or the pain that you felt.
Exactly. Yeah.
So talk to me then about, and it'll kind of lead on to how you got your first customers, but
Hmm.
prior to even having any customers, how did you ensure that you were surrounding yourself by people who would give you raw, honest, unfiltered
Hmm.
feedback that allow you to kind of test and iterate and really build Osprey into what it is now?
Yeah, I think part of it is networking. Part of it
Mm.
is just literally being in the room. Like we live in a world that you can always be remote. So you have to choose to actually show up sometimes. And that's really important. People remember a face in person much more than they do, one of 8 little boxes on a screen during a Zoom call where you're having whatever. So some of it is just showing up. We found some of our resources by accident because we were in the right room. Plexel is a great example of that. So we went through Cyber Runway twice, which has a couple different tiers. It's a little bit of a UK-backed accelerator. Great resources in there. We found Cyber Runway because we were attending a security conference and they had a booth. And on the second day of the conference, we literally were just walking by and the poster caught our eye and we went over and asked them what they were doing. And that's the exact need that we had at that time was getting some of those resources like the IP law or go to market strategy or how to found a company in the UK versus US versus EU, all that kind of stuff. They answered all of those questions. So some of it is just literally showing up and doing the work. That's not easy, but it's a mandatory thing. I think the other way that we've surrounded ourselves with the right people is by being vulnerable, being willing to raise your hand and say, I don't understand this. I don't know if this is the right email. I don't know if this is the right message I should be sending. So being willing to ask for help is really important. And then surprisingly, a lot of people, when they ask for help, don't listen to the answer. You got to listen to the answer, right? If someone tells you and gives you their feedback and insight, it might be wrong, it might be right, but you at least have to listen to it.
There's a number of key takeaways, I think, here. Surround yourself by the right people, get into the right kind of programs. And I know there's a whole kind of counter argument that finding the right program and finding the right accelerator thing
Sure.
is so important, because you see some founders might bounce between multiple, they're not really, they're getting the high level kind of advice, but they're not really getting much to take away and actually
Mm.
implement within the business. So talk to me around some of the surprises or
Yeah, I think we knew that there were tons of unknown unknowns, right?
Mm,
None of us had ever ran a marketing campaign. Neither of us, excuse me. But I think I always respected people in marketing, sales, business development, all of these roles because I didn't understand or know what they did. But now that I'm doing it, actually feeling that pain of the dozens of LinkedIn messages or the talking to someone where you have no idea anything about their background or their company or anything like that. That's difficult, but yeah, a little bit of a surprise there. I would also say that we were happily surprised question mark about how quickly the problem is accelerating. So we thought this was going to be a 2 to 3 year kind of problem. As DORA and some regulations come in, as attackers start to use it, then there's going to be this magic moment where everything lines up and we can hit it then. But that 2 year window turned into like a 6 month sprint on a treadmill kind of thing. I mean, earlier this year there was Shai Hulud, which was a really big NPM package that kind of wrecked a few thousand organizations and compromised their infrastructure. There's also a handful of other really, really big ones this year, and we knew that it was going to be a problem, but we were happily surprised. Not happily for the people that were impacted, but happily because of our ability to forecast how big of a surprise it was and how quickly it's been growing.
So let's zoom in for a second then and
Mm,
talk about kind of the regulation, because I think this is an incredible kind of wave, whether rightly or wrongly, it's an incredible wave that you're now kind of on and able to ride.
absolutely.
So let's look at that kind of regulation. What does it mean for the UK and businesses
Sure.
doing business with Europe, and how does that kind of then help position you and Osprey?
Yeah. So I think one of the big things that this does, SBOMs have been around for a decade, maybe a couple decades. Software bill of materials, right? This is the ingredient list on the back of your application that says, ketchup has water and sugar and all these other things. It's the exact same thing for software. If you just have that ingredient list, if you just have that SBOM and don't do anything with it, shocker, nothing happens, right? It's the actual regulation, it's having some teeth and governance around what's going into it. Do you know what's actually in that ketchup, your application? So DORA and some of these regulations are actually putting some governance and guidance around that. You need to now know what are the components of your software. So you have to either have active SBOMs or the ability to create SBOMs pretty readily. There's also been instances of this in the Indian trading regulations and SEBI. They've been really serious in taking it up a notch around paying attention what the components of your software are. And SEBI is even going to make sure that you secure those components, which means you have to know exactly all of the little bits and pieces that go into it, open source packages included, and make sure that you can attest that all of them are safe, that none of them are malicious or dangerous or anything like that. What this means for the UK, I think, is kind of a bit of a long story, but reality is a lot of organizations, a lot of vendors and third parties are going to have to step up their game. I think I can say this as a vendor, but most vendors don't do this and do something until you pay them to do it, or they're forced to, right? This is kind of the being forced to. I foresee a lot of organizations and their third party due diligence program start asking for SBOMs more readily, start asking for up to date SBOMs. When was the last time it was updated? This was updated in 2017. That's not accurate, right? Like it has to be either live or close to real time. This also means that if you aren't building that out from a technology point of view, if you aren't building that out in an automation point of view and you still rely on all of these processes manually, you're either going to have to hire like crazy to help facilitate some of these requests, or you're just going to get left behind and likely lose out on customers because you're not able to answer some of these due diligence questions.
It's the real business kind of consequence and risk there that is you're gonna have to up your game, or you're not gonna be able to do business. Essentially, I guess is the long and short of it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So talk about how that then helps you kind of riding this wave, kind of capture more market share in in this space.
Sure. Well, I mean, a year ago we were talking to CISOs, and they were like, they knew supply chain was an issue. They
Mm.
knew software supply chain was an issue, but they would think of it more from a vendor point of view. Now, because of the NPM incidents, because of the PyPI incidents, and because of DORA and the Resiliency Act, they are looking at open source components as part of that profile. If you don't know what's coming in through open source, like, well done, you have a list of all your vendors. That's maybe 40% of the picture. So
Mm.
yeah, what you doing? So what we're really doing is that education piece has gotten a lot quicker. We no longer, well, sometimes we still do, but most of the time we no longer have to go in and tell them about the problem and how bad it is. We go into a customer conversation. They're like, yeah, we know the problem. How do you fix it? What's your diversification? What's your differentiation on the marketplace? So yeah, we found that very interesting. Another thing is I think CISOs are tired, um, just generally, but they're really tired of rip and replacing vendors. They're really
Mm.
tired of adding a new feature, adding a new module. DORA is coming. DORA 2 is coming in 3 years' time. DORA 12 is coming in 2035, whatever, and they always require a new feature. So you're either constantly paying a vendor more to catch up with the latest things, or you find something that kind of fits in where you need it to. And so that's one of the reasons why we're building Osprey to sit alongside of established security tooling. You don't have to rip out everything and tear up a 300K contract to become DORA compliant. You don't have to force your vendor and get a project manager on it and chase them every 2 months to make sure that they're actually implementing everything appropriately. You can just bring us in, and then we sit alongside your SCA tool or your SaaS tool, or we can integrate into the CI/CD pipeline, and we're trying to be more of an ally to the engineer and the security analysts rather than a totalitarian rip everything out and use us solely because we are, the almighty.
And was that always the intention when you started the business?
So we wanted the business to be engineering centric. I
Mm.
think a lot of security companies are focus on security people, security or compliance people. We wanted it to be engineering centric, which is why we've really focused on enabling the business, enabling the engineering velocity and innovation through a security lens. So removing the disablement, it's a really clunky way of saying it, but getting out of the way. So
Mm.
yes, this specific way, this came through natural conversations with customers and CISOs and engineers in particular, because no engineer wants another security tool in their pipeline to block their PR and then they raise a ticket or give them a bunch of things for them to ignore later. They just want something to move a little quicker or to be a little bit quieter. So that's why we're building it that way.
That makes sense that, you kind of built this with the philosophy of the mindset of thinking about it from an engineer's perspective, which is why you've got that more horizontal,
Mhm.
solution rather than that point one, which is just selling to a particular pain point of a particular persona that only does
Exactly.
a really narrow thing. So this is a growing problem and people are increasingly aware of it. So I guess that kind of leads to your go to market. We've spoken off air, the PLG or the product led growth
Yeah.
motion that you're adopting in the business. It seems in cybersecurity that everyone wants a PLG motion. No
Mhm.
one wants to hire that big brute sales army, but inevitably not many businesses manage to pull off PLG very well. So talk
Yes.
me through that kind of the rationale.
Yeah, so I think you've really nailed it. There's probably a half dozen tops cybersecurity companies that have really done PLG well. Sneak is the obvious one. They are the gold standard for cybersecurity PLG. The reason we're adopting it is because it fits neatly with the problem that we're fixing, the people that we're trying to help, and the actual vendor relationship that we're trying to build. So the problem is open source code, right? That's very easy, very visible, and open source is quite literally built by random people around the world. Some of it is built by Microsoft and Google and big enterprises that maintain large chunks of the ecosystem, but a lot of it is built by a woman in Taipei or a guy in Iowa, right? And so they're never going to have the budget to actually be able to go out and buy a CrowdStrike or buy a Sneak or something like that. They need something that's really lightweight that they can be like, wow, I've read a lot of articles about open source malware. A nightmare for me would be if my package, my baby, this thing that I've built over the last 10 years, falls victim to malware because of a phishing attack or something silly like that. So they need to build in a protection for themselves. And if we're doing that at an engineering level, it's trivial to be able to do it for the open source engineers and hobbyists and individuals at small organizations or SMEs, a mom and pop shop that has, 2 engineers and no security people. They would be able to adopt it as well. And then if you're able to do both of those, then you can do it for an entire engineering suite. And that way we can provide the engineering resources and features, RBAC and SSO and auditing and all of that beautiful stuff that an enterprise needs, but we're also able to actually provide the features, usability, and functionality that an engineer needs. And that way we're kind of fitting in all the way across the problem set, both in an ecosystem, individual, and eventually ICP.
So if I've understood that correctly or kind of read between the lines, it sounds like, and do correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like Osprey, one of the unique things about it is it's not just a pure enterprise play solution.
Absolutely.
It can be adopted by businesses of all different kind of size and scale. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. It can be adopted and used within minutes by anybody, right? The pricing scales based on usage, so an enterprise that has tens of thousands of packages will inevitably pay more, but 'tis the cost of literally doing business. And an engineer who works slowly on their open source project on weekends, once a month kind of thing, they don't need to be paying $1,000 a month for a massive security tool. So they can, we're working on getting an open source community feature so that people who are actually maintaining open source projects can use it for free. If not, then it'll be a nominal like £2, £5 a month, something like that.
And this is the $1 million question, and one that's, it's not going to be an easy one to answer probably, but who's going to get the most benefit out of your
Hmm.
technology?
Yeah, that is $1 million question. I think the engineers will be the people who benefit the most regularly. I think the security leadership and security engineering teams will benefit the most in volume. We were talking to some people that work at a security vendor actually recently, and they had to go through an incident. They spun it up. Something was detected in production that came from a malicious package. And then you have to backtrace it. Okay, it came from production to here, and then it was on that engineer, maybe, but they didn't have it set up on engineering. They didn't have any detection set up on engineering laptops to identify the packages that were being installed. So then they had to go and literally talk to people, which is great. You should be talking to engineers all the time, but you shouldn't have to talk to 120 of them to figure out where something was installed, right? So the security engineers will be enabled to see and react so much more quickly than they are currently or might be. So I think the security teams will benefit like the most. Also, with regulations coming through, the ability to say everything top to bottom has been scanned for malware tick, that's going to be really powerful. The last thing anybody wants is an auditor that really knows their stuff coming in and saying, cool, excellent, you've done vulnerability analysis and you've done this. Have you checked for malware? No? Okay, well, let's do it now. You know, you don't want that as an action item out of one of your SOC 2 or DORA compliance checks.
So it sounds like you're really kind of providing not just the engineers, but the business with everything they kind of need and nothing more. And in that way, you're being that business enabler, not that kind of hindrance, which cybersecurity typically is sort of seen as being.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And coming back onto something you said previously and said a number of times, there's so many people within an organization that can benefit from what you offer.
Mhm.
So who do you sell to?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it depends on uh, the avenue. I think you sell differently in different places. On Reddit, we're not going to be selling to chief compliance officers, right? On Reddit, we'll be selling to engineers so that they can do their job quickly. Also, that pairs really well with the engineers that are maintaining open source. So in engineers, we can sell to that PLG kind of motion. For the higher level, the platform or whatever, that we can sell to either the compliance managers, the CISO, the security engineers, or the CTO. One of the other really powerful things is that if you are able to manage your incidents well and make sure that incidents stay out of production, that is like a not nominal amount of engineering time that you no longer have to burn. So it's an avoidance of operational debt that can really benefit a business. These incidents sound bad, and you hear about numbers of, this crypto theft took out 300K or something like that, but it's never the actual ticket price that kills a business that really hurts them. It's the hundreds of engineering hours and the hundreds of security hours and then the legal hours. And then you had to get a third party IR team in and then a comms team. And then you communicated all the way up to the board. And now you're bothering the board with it and all these kind of things. All of those hours add up massively. And so if you're able to avoid all of that, that's a massive amount of operational debt that you can avoid rather than dealing with in the future.
One thing I love about this and what you're building at Osprey, and I think why it makes the PLG kind of motion make so much sense, is the benefit to everyone in the organization who will be kind of touching this is so evident
Yes.
without you needing this kind of army of salespeople.
Exactly. The business is there to grow, right? If the business wasn't there to grow and build, it wouldn't be a business. It would be a project. It'd be a nonprofit, right? So if you're selling the business, hey, do you want to grow faster? That's a much easier sales and sales conversation to have than, well, 0.03% of people in your industry experience a $1 billion black swan event. Have you thought about this? And then you have to look at the risk register, and it's actually 14th, but the cost in this, and you balance it out, and yeah. Honestly, I think we're in a good place because we started with the problem and then worked backwards. We started with engineers don't want another security tool. Engineers don't want to be slowed down. How can we stop this from happening? And then we built the product from there.
Love it. And so you're in a good place now. We've uncovered that. Let's talk about where you want. Let's talk about where you want to get to. So you're riding this wave. We talked about DORA. We talked about the resilience bill coming in. Let's talk and turn our attention to where's Osprey going to be in the next sort of 3 to 5 years.
Sure. Yeah. There's a couple specific products that I'm really excited for. One of them, threat hunting the marketplace, is a little bit more. That's kind of dear to my heart because I'm an incident response nerd. So I want to go out there and seek the stuff rather than scan the stuff that just engineers are using. The other really cool thing I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, that Osprey at its core is a code scanner, right? Right now it's a code scanner that's being used for malware, but that doesn't mean it has to be used for malware. So we're also able to pretty quickly pivot into MCP servers and make sure that MCP servers and environments are secure and there's nothing malicious going on in there. We're also able to pretty quickly pivot into the Visual Studio Code space and Chrome extension space. So we'll be able to scan those as long as there's raw code available on a marketplace, or if you provide it yourself, if you're willing to open up your proprietary code base, then we'll be able to scan it. And right now, the hypotheses that we're working with and testing and lowering false positive rates and all those wonderful things that vendors do is for malware. But that doesn't mean it can't be used for other things.
Are you going to be focusing specifically in the UK, or where do you see that geographical expansion?
Yeah, I think the nature of cybersecurity and the nature of enterprise customers in today's world is that if you aren't targeting the US, you're probably going to fail, because someone who's larger who is targeting the US is going to just eat up your market share, and then you're
Mm.
just working to survive rather than working to thrive. So we're absolutely planning on being universal, global, whatever. So there are some interesting conversations we've had in the US, and we plan to expand out there sooner than later. I wouldn't be against having a US employee base. I do think, however, that the UK is a bit of an untapped market when it comes to actual talent. I mean, a senior software engineer in San Francisco is absolutely incredible and probably like 350K or something like that, right? Whereas the UK has some of the top universities in the world, and they have some really fantastic facilities provided by law. Vacations are required, pension is required, things like this.
Mm.
It's kind of crazy that you have to detail those, but it's true. And being able to balance the mental health and the salary and the quality of talent is a really powerful thing. So I think there's a bit of an untapped market here in the UK that we'd like to explore a bit more. But yeah, we plan on. I think the supply chain space in general has been a bit of an amorphous one that a lot of security companies haven't quite come to grasp
Mm.
with yet. And now with M&S and the NPM attacks that we've been talking about and all of this, people are going to start paying more attention. Now that they're being forced to look at it from a regulatory and audit point of view, cool. Let's find a vendor that fits that space really well because it's built from and for supply chain, not a application posture management tool that's kind of wandered in there sideways, but really something that's built for this problem
Mm.
specifically and solves it well and directly, and it's efficient and it enables us.
So it sounds like because you've built for this specific problem rather than jumping on that kind of hype cycle or that hype train, that's why you will be the kind of the go-to
Yeah,
in this space. Well, hopefully that's what we're hoping anyway.
absolutely.
Uh,
That's the goal.
the outlook is fantastic, and furthermore, with the PLG motion, it's great because you don't need all the boots on the ground in the US, but you can still dominate and you can still expand globally without this sort of army of people over there. So that's brilliant. Now, talking about people that are earlier on in their entrepreneurial journey,
Mm,
what would your kind of advice and lessons learned and hard knocks be?
yeah. So I think one of the things that I directly stole this from my corporate life, but keeping a log of your wins, I think is really, really important, especially in entrepreneurial life, because there's another word that autocorrect helps with. Because you are sprinting at 600 miles an hour constantly. You
Mm.
you remember the failures because they sting and they keep you awake at night. That pitch that you messed up or the sales call that hi Lloyd's and it's actually Barclays, that's never good. All of those kind of things you remember, but you don't always remember the wins. So
Mm.
we have an active log called our accomplishments log, where if something big happens, we just pop it in there. It's one line, not even usually a full sentence, but it's important. And then you can see the journey and the sheer amount of progress we've made in the year and a half, year or so since we founded Osprey, and the 6 months before that when we were doing ideation. Like, we've made such incredible strides, and that
Mm.
really helps you like continue on the marathon that is founding a company and taking it to market. Some of the other things we learned is there's tons of books out there. I think if you're a first time founder, you should really get out there and learn breadth first and then dig into the things. In my career, I've always tried to lean into my weaknesses a little bit. It's one of the reasons I went to data security from incident response, because I'd never done data security. So, like, yeah, sure, why not? Let's take up a new adventure. So I did the same thing with books, both go to market books. That was a particular weakness of mine, or opportunity to grow, I guess, things like that. So being honest with yourself and knowing where your soft spots are and then working on them, putting people either in your direct team or your advising team or reaching out to networking events. When we started looking at the crypto market for our customers, we just went to crypto events. We talked to the engineers that build crypto and how accepting they would be of a tool like us. And we got some negative feedback, but we got a lot of positive feedback. And that enabled us to have better conversations when we actually went to that market because we just knew we didn't know something and wandered into those conversations sideways.
I love that. And I think there's the three kind of takeaways I've kind of noted down from that. I think first of all, it's like having that self-compassion. Similarly, I mean, my
Mm,
wife made me I've got a whiteboard behind my laptop here. She always makes me kind of note down kind of the things that have gone well. And I tell you what, that's had a monumental shift for
yeah,
me. So I love the fact that you mentioned that. I think another thing that aligns with one thing, I'm naturally an introspective person, but if we were going to kind of call it like a audit your strengths and weaknesses
yep,
and kind of act on that, that it's okay that you don't know everything and you've not got to be a master, but you either need to bring in someone that's got the kind of complementary skills, or you need to invest some sort of time to at least understand enough to kind of get by. The last thing, showing up in person, we've spoken, and it's been a theme of the podcast of with all this kind of virtual digital world, it's so easy to actually build in silence, but actually showing up at networking events, meeting people face to face is so important.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Being open just to new ideas, new perspectives, new organizations, new rooms. It's really powerful. And it's I'm an introvert, so I don't get energy from it. But when you have a really fun interaction, when you find someone that gets it or solved the problem or is curious or something like that, there's a spurt of energy that comes from that.
Mm, absolutely. Well, look, Nate, I've taken away so much from this conversation, and it's been an absolute joy having you on the podcast. And I'm sure, and I hope the listeners have taken away as much as I have from it. So thank you so much for your contribution and your time today, Nate.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks so much, David.